We're like, well, what if Tony Stark brought the Stark Expo to Hong Kong? And like he sets up shop here in Tomorrowland, and that would be a way in. Like we'd have to acknowledge Disneyland as a park because he would know that he's in Disneyland. So that was our initial hook, but it wasn't the version of the Iron Man experience that you saw today. So one night, I, like most of my ideas, they usually happen at about 3:00 in the morning. And I woke up and I said to my wife, I'm like, we did all that work trying to figure out how Star Tours could fit in. And we've gone down this other path with the Stark Expo, but like, what if we married those ideas? There's nothing sacred that a simulator ride has to be a Star Wars ride. Like, why couldn't a simulator ride be a Marvel ride?
That is Brian Crosby, creative director of themed entertainment at Marvel Entertainment. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Hey there, thanks so much for joining me here on episode 141 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. A lot has happened since the last time I talked with you. We've got capacity increases, masks going away in Florida in some cases, and the Avengers Campus is open. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Wow, there's a lot to cover. And I feel like it's the perfect time to have my guest today, Brian Crosby, who, like I mentioned in the introduction, is the creative director of themed entertainment at Marvel Entertainment. And we're not going to really talk about Avengers Campus today, but everything in Brian's story, I feel like, mirrors the evolution of Marvel at Disney. It's like basically he was there for all the moments that led up to where we are now with this big new land at DCA. And I think, too, with Brian being such a fan of comics growing up, and he's seen it from when comics were very different when he was younger and just going to the store and picking up various issues and where Marvel has gone. And then being someone who worked at Walt Disney Imagineering and saw Marvel get acquired by Disney in 2009 and was just blown away by it, and then became involved with attractions like the Iron Man Experience and Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, and basically saw it on both ends because he then went to work for Marvel. And so it's really cool to get a chance to talk to Brian about his background, how he got started at Disney, and then approaching theme parks and the company in general as a big Marvel fan first. So Brian has a cool perspective there from the other side of it, and now he bridges both gaps where he works at Marvel, still gets involved in theme park projects, has done a lot of cool things at Disney. And I think it's a great backdrop to where we're going in the future, both with theme parks and with Disney Plus and Loki and all the movies coming up. We talk a little bit about that, and just to see where it's gone and possibly where it's going in the future, because there are a lot of different ways that Marvel can be connected, even through the NBA, which I wouldn't have guessed. Disney's continuing to expand what they're doing with Marvel, and it's a really exciting time for fans across the board of the parks and of the comics. So let's dive right in. Here is Brian Crosby. My guest today is creative director of themed entertainment at Marvel Entertainment, who helps to bring Marvel to theme parks and other experiences around the world. He started his career at Walt Disney Imagineering in 2005, worked as a concept designer on a wide range of projects, also helped jumpstart the Iron Man Experience, which was the first Marvel-themed attraction at a Disney park. It is Brian Crosby. Brian, thank you so much for talking with me here on the podcast.
It's my pleasure, Dan. Thanks so much for having me. It's good to be here.
Oh, yeah. It's a blast to talk with you. You've done a lot of really cool things, and I really enjoy the idea of talking about Marvel because, as you obviously know, there's a lot of Marvel things going on. It's really fun and exciting, even during the pandemic and everything. It's really cool.
Yeah, we're all very excited. I mean, look, any one of us that work at Marvel, we've inherited a legacy that anybody would die to be a part of. And so we're fortunate enough to stand on the shoulders of giants here. So, between Stan and Jack and, Steve Ditko and so many others, it's an honor and a blessing to work on some of this stuff. And man, it's, even after 80 years, we're still going strong, and the future looks bright. So we're all very excited.
Oh yeah, I mean, just between all the movies coming out this year and the TV, and then so many things at the parks, and we could go on and on. But I'd love to know a little bit more about your background too, which is because I think it's really interesting, kind of how you got started. So when you were younger, before you were involved with Disney or theme parks or anything, I'm curious, like, what really got you interested in becoming an artist when you were younger, and, comic books and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I can't remember a time when I wasn't drawing. Like, that's kind of what I've just always done. I grew up like most kids in the 80s, with my Saturday morning cartoons, and I Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends and He-Man and G.I. Joe and so many others, Super Friends. Those were things that I really gravitated towards. And I just kind of fell in love with superheroes and characters and pop culture. And I couldn't have articulated it that way as a kid. But, I think one of the things I really loved doing was, my parents would try to encourage my love of art and love of character. And, I'd get coloring books, and I was always trying to mirror exactly what I saw on the show. So I wasn't one to like venture outside and do weird color combinations or anything. I wanted everything to look exactly right. So like if I was drawing Spider-Man, I wanted the reds and the blues to be exactly right and stay inside the lines and look really cool. But my favorite thing to do was open up the inside of a coloring book. And inside that coloring book was a blank white sheet on the inside cover of the cardboard cover. And it was like the perfect substrate for drawing on. And so I would just have fun drawing on those inside covers. And so I just, from a very early age, discovered that I had a passion for drawing. And like I said, my parents were always encouraging of me in doing that. And it's just something I gravitated towards, and always did.
Well, yeah, that's really cool. And I mean, it fits with kind of what you ended up doing with your career. But I know too that, you also were involved with being interested in Disney, and I believe you live near Disneyland. So I'm curious about how much background you had there with theme parks or just with Disneyland in general.
Yeah, I mean, look, I grew up in the shadow of Disneyland, just about 15, 20 minutes away from the park. And so going to Disneyland was always one of my favorite things to do as a kid. My parents would, we didn't have annual passes or anything like that, but my parents would take me and my brothers to Disneyland once a year, usually around May. And that we always looked forward to it because they were going to take us out of school and we'd get to go to Disneyland for the day. And the night before was just like Christmas Eve to me. I remember taking out all my records and listening to the Disneyland music. And I had this book of Pirates of the Caribbean. And inside of it was essentially a fun map on the inside front cover. And I remember tracing my finger around the attraction, the pathway, and just imagining the things that I was going to get to see and do the next day at Disneyland. So yeah, the theme parks were just something that I just really loved. I mean, of course, went to Knott's Berry Farm, but Disneyland was always, very special to me. Peter Pan's Flight was my favorite attraction. The idea of never growing up and getting to fly and, just getting to be a little boy forever and have fun. I think those were things that really resonated with me as a kid. And so going to Disneyland, I remember when the Disney Channel came out, that was the first time I'd ever heard of Imagineering, is there were these interstitials called Imagineer That. And they showed, in one of them, they showed these scuba divers going down into the submarine voyage, kind of the classic version where you had the mermaids and the buried treasure and all that. And I remember them calling them Imagineers. And so that was the first time I had ever heard that word and thinking, well, that's an awesome thing to do, that you get to go scuba dive in the submarine voyage. And that would be really fun to do. But I didn't really think of Imagineering outside of that one moment. I hadn't really thought of it as a career path. comic books was really where I saw my future. That's kind of, I discovered comics when I was about 10, and it's exactly when I was 10 in 1987. I remember it very well. My first comic book. And I really, when I opened that front cover and I saw that there were pencilers and writers and inkers and colorists, and I was like, that's like a thing that people do. Like they get to, like, these are like grown adults that draw superheroes for a living. So at 10 years old, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And little did I know that, someday I'd get to marry, Disneyland and theme parks with, comic book storytelling. So, I got kind of the best of both worlds later on in my life.
Yeah, it totally makes sense hearing about your background, where you ended up, because like you said, all that stuff kind of fits together. We're of similar age because, I was born in 76. And so I was really into comic books in the 80s and early 90s as a kid. They were so big at the time, Marvel. I mean, I say that, it's very different than now, but I'd love to know from you, what was it about comic books that got you so interested in that? And then taking that along, like when you were going to education and stuff, how did you go about deciding I'm going to become an artist and do this for school and for a career?
Yeah, well, comics captivated me because it was clearly illustration. It was, like I said, I recognized early on that this, people drew these, they did these for a living. And, when I'd watch cartoons or whatever, you didn't really hang around and watch the credits in the 80s. Like once the credits showed up, you changed the channel or you'd walk out of the movie theater. Marvel Studios has trained us to sit tight and watch the credits all the way through because you never know what's going to be at the end. But in the 80s, that wasn't really a thing. And so, you changed the channel. And so it had never occurred to me that people did that for a living. But like I said, with comics, I knew from the very beginning, Stan Lee, Todd McFarlane, these were names that I started to become familiar with. And so I thought of that as a thing that I could do. And I think they captured my imagination because it wasn't like animation where the whole thing was spelled out. There was the story in between the story. Like you'd see a panel and then something would happen, in the next panel and then the next panel and the next panel, and you'd have to fill in the gaps in your mind. So it allowed me to use my imagination, but I got wrapped up in the stories. I got wrapped up in the characters. And the fact that, these things came out every week or every month, like I said, when I discovered that first book in 1987, it was at a 7-Eleven, right down the street from my house on a spinner rack. And the guy goes, oh yeah, they come out every month. And I was like, what is this like new world that has just like opened up to me? And I remember my mom, she was the one who she enabled me with the comics. She took me to that first 7-Eleven and then she took me to the local swap meet. And I'd find the comic book dealer, the guy that had old back issue bins, and I'd be rifling through and finding things to fill out my collection. And I fell in love with the hobby. I fell in love with the medium of comic book storytelling. And when I decided to go to school and really become an artist, I toyed with the idea of animation and studied that a little bit. But really, I came back to illustration and concept design and sequential storytelling as really something that I enjoyed. I felt like I had more control over it. I fell in love with it as a professional as much as I did as a fan growing up.
I mean, it's funny because where we used to go was the 7-Eleven near our house, and it was basically the same thing. Ride our bikes there, and then comic book stores were a whole nother level. I mean, that's like crazy. Like,
right.
Wait, it's a store? I don't understand. It was just
only comics. Like I'm in. Like I'm gonna live here. Yeah,
I don't get it. But I'm interested too because everything you're describing makes sense in terms of heading towards that type of career. But I know ultimately you submitted a project for the Imaginations competition, right, which eventually I believe led you ultimately to working for WDI. So I'm curious for you, how did you decide to submit that project and to get involved with that? I assume with the hope that you might get to work there.
Yeah, I mean, look, that one kind of came to me. So I wasn't aware of it. I was going to Cal State Fullerton here in Orange County. Like I said, studying illustration, studying art. And I was working as a security guard at night at the Anaheim Hilton, ironically, right across the street from Disneyland.
Yeah.
I was a security guard over there, working the graveyard shift, trying to put myself through school. And a buddy of mine, Josh Steadman, who's an amazing concept designer and themed entertainment storyteller, and just a great friend. He and I had been friends for a number of years, and I knew he wanted to be an Imagineer. That was his lifelong dream. And he called me one day and said, "Hey, Imagineering is doing this competition. It's called Imaginations. We could enter it. We just got to come up with an idea. And if we do, we might get to be interns at Imagineering." He's like, "Do you want to do it with me?" And that was it. And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it. I got nothing to lose, right? I need an internship to graduate." So that my mentality was like, I just need an internship because I got to graduate from college and get my degree. And so that was really where my focus was. And that one decision changed my life, changed everything for me. Because then Josh and I and his brother and another friend of ours, we did this project together. And the idea was based on the Rocketeer. Josh and I, Josh is probably the biggest Rocketeer fan that there is that I know of. And I love the Rocketeer as well. And we talked about what it might be. And so it was conceived of as an attraction that could have gone into California Adventure in the 1930s Hollywood type thing. And my role on the project was to storyboard it. So I storyboarded it, not in traditional storyboard fashion, though. I storyboarded it as if it were a 1930s comic book. That was kind of the inspiration. And I look at it now and I see the rudimentary art that I was doing at the time, and it makes me cringe. But it was enough to get me looked at least at the time. And I learned not just, it didn't just get me in, but I also learned a lot about presentation as well. And I learned a lot of that from Josh, because the whole idea was to package this thing as if it came from that era. We did a DVD of the project that was put inside of an old time film canister, and that was all inside of a gold embossed Rocketeer box. And the whole thing was themed from top to bottom. And so we submitted it. Imagineering loved our presentation, and they called us up and said, "We'd like to bring you guys in to do some interviews." So we did some phone interviews at first, and then I went into Imagineering and got to interview there, and was fortunate enough to get that internship. So the summer of 2005, I did my internship at Imagineering in the Information Resource Center, and ended up being just a great experience. Got to meet all the concept designers and artists at WDI at the time, because I was cataloging, artwork, and, so all these beautiful pieces of art that are preserved in this art library. The art, this is kind of the very beginning of digital art. People are just starting to make that kind of transition, but most of the artists at WDI at the time were still doing traditional art boards and concept renderings on paper, and they were bringing them in to be cataloged. And so every time they'd come in, I'd get to chat them up, tell them who I was, and I always had my portfolio at the ready, and I was quick to show them my portfolio and get their feedback, because I knew even then that this was a very unique opportunity that I had to be in the walls of Imagineering, the inner sanctum, as it were, and then be able to show my artwork to these Imagineers. And I definitely wanted to take advantage of it in hopes of, getting a job there, really.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing experience, especially how it kind of all came together. So how did you ultimately then get a role full-time at Imagineering, and kind of what was that early work like when you were able to, work there, not just as an internship?
Yeah. So, at the very end of my internship, everybody that was an intern that summer, we had to give a presentation, and the presentation was kind of, "Hey, here's what I did this summer," kind of a thing. And I asked the lady who was in charge of it, I said, "So what is everybody else doing in terms of presentation?" And she goes, "Oh, well, everybody's kind of putting together a PowerPoint, and they're going to show the stuff that they worked on." And so immediately I thought, okay, if a PowerPoint presentation is what everyone is going to do, that means the lights are going to go off, and all the potential project managers and executives at Imagineering that were watching this presentation would not see you, the person, and would feel disconnected from you. And frankly, I thought probably get a little bit bored watching a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, what can I do to not do that? And I said, so in my brain, I thought, all right, we're going to do the complete opposite. No PowerPoint presentation. I've been here working with all these physical pieces of art. So I'd like to put them all on display. Some of the things, I got to work on and deal with when I was working in the art library. And I also discovered that in the art library where it originally was, that building unfortunately is no longer there at WDI, but there was a giant skylight at the top. And when you opened it, it was loud and it was old, like it'd been there forever, I think. And it would open up. And I'm like, this is perfect. I'm like, so all the lights are going to be down. I go, can I go last? And so everybody gives their PowerPoint presentation. And then I said, I want that skylight thing to open up. So it wakes everybody up, the light comes in, and I'm going to present myself. So I was hoping that the executives and the leaders would like my presentation skills and hopefully like me as a person and want to work with me. That was my thinking. And I had some great conversations after that presentation. It went really well. And I was offered a full-time job working at visual imaging production, kind of a subsect of the model shop at Imagineering. And, I wasn't doing anything glamorous. I was putting together presentations for the creative division, a lot of kind of grunt work. But, again, I had a full-time job at Imagineering, and I had benefits, and, my family was going to be able to eat. So I was okay. But again, I recognized that as the opportunity that it was, in that now my foot's in the door yet again. I'm now an employee. I'm one step closer to the dream of becoming a concept designer here. And so I knew then and there, it's time to really go to work. And so I looked for every opportunity to work on projects, I found out other projects that were maybe in development or had a long lead time, and I would work on that stuff late at night. Sometimes I was there all night long with a fold out mat that I had underneath my desk. I would crash for a couple hours in my office and literally work all night, trying to build my portfolio. And after about a year and a half, I did break in and was able to get into the concept design group.
Excellent. It's great that you recognize too how much of an opportunity that was, because I think that sounds like that was really the key. Well, as a concept designer, I know you were involved with, in some form with a lot of cool projects, Finding Nemo subs. I believe you had some things to do with Tron and Star Wars concepts. So I'd love to know for you, what were some of the most memorable or fun projects for you when you started out as a concept designer?
Yeah, I mean, I really love working in kind of the blue sky phase. That's my favorite time of the project, because it's always great when things become real, and you have funding, and now you're moving towards an opening date. But for me, as a concept designer, I really like the front end of that before we necessarily even identify where this thing is going to live, and we're just dreaming big. Thinking of anything and everything we could do. What would be the coolest thing that we would want to experience? And so that, and I enjoy that part of the process, and then getting to present it to people and hopefully get them excited about it. And then it becomes a real project. And then we drill down on some of the, the finer details, and you have to make cuts and edits and things like that. And you have to sacrifice some things. And, so that's part of the natural course of any project. But I really, the things that you mentioned, I loved working on Tron in Shanghai Disneyland was a blast. I didn't work on it for long. I did some storyboards for it, but I really found my niche working on Star Wars projects. And then once Marvel became a part of the family, that was a home run for me. Because, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, comics and theme parks were about to come together in a big way. And so that was something that I was very, very excited about. And so I think it really comes down to the subject matter was always fun, but it changed, right? I mean, sometimes it was Pirates of the Caribbean. Sometimes it was Tinkerbell and the Fairies. Sometimes it was Star Wars. Sometimes it was the Avengers. It was all over the map. Sometimes it was Alice in Wonderland. It was all over the place. But it was the people that I worked with, the mentors that I had that really made such a huge difference in my career. People like Robert Coltrane and Tony Baxter and Dave Crawford and Tom Fitzgerald and then people that you've interviewed in the past like Jim Clark and Tom Morris. Those people became incredibly influential mentors to me at Imagineering, and they helped shape my career. They helped give me opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And you really, I discovered that as important as my hard work was, and it was important, I also needed to be networking and have advocates for me and my design ideas, my design style within the walls of Imagineering. Because you have people that have worked there for like 30, 35, 40 years. And if you're the new kid on the block and you're trying to get onto a project, it's sometimes it can be a little overwhelming to try and get selected when they have these kind of old reliables that they've worked with for many years. So, it was kind of twofold. So it was like hard work, sacrifice, no substitute for that, but also networking and developing relationships with people inside the walls of Imagineering.
That has to play just a big role, working with such great experienced designers, but it can be a challenge. But you mentioned Marvel, and it's easy for me now to think about, of course, Marvel being acquired was so obvious. It was a great idea. But at the time Iron Man had come out, but it wasn't, the Hulk and everything, but it wasn't considered such a no-brainer. But I'm sure for you, with your background being at Disney, this had to be really cool. So I'm curious for you, that experience when you learned, I believe in 2009, when they acquired Marvel. I mean, what was that like for you as such a fan? Because not everyone there, I'm sure, was on that same scale at the time.
I never could have imagined that would happen, right? It had never even occurred to me. I mean, I was already a Wednesday warrior, at the local comic book shop. Every Wednesday we'd go, myself and Josh Shipley and a few other Imagineers, we'd go and get Taco Bell and go to House of Secrets in Burbank. That was like our Wednesday tradition. So, I love superheroes, love comics. And so when I woke up that morning, went into work and opened up my computer and saw the Disney logo and the Marvel logo together, I couldn't even imagine that this was real. Like I had to check several other websites to make sure I was seeing this correctly. I'm like, wait, so Disney bought Marvel? Like Marvel is part of Disney. Like we could do Marvel stuff. Like that's what that means. Like we can do like Marvel attractions. Like my brain exploded. I'm texting everybody that I know. I was so excited. And this was the perfect opportunity for me. Because I actually went through a little bit of a down point in my early concept design work where I was getting some feedback that my style was maybe a little too comic booky. And not everybody was looking for a comic booky style. And so I wasn't getting put on as many projects as I was hoping for. So I was getting a little nervous about, my career, and I was, going to try and reinvent my art style and art approach. But then Disney buys Marvel and changes the whole world for me. I didn't know anybody at Marvel. I just was a huge fan. And, certainly loved, the first two Iron Man films, and, loved the Incredible Hulk, and going back, loved, the Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, of course. And, the Bryan Singer X-Men film. Like I loved all that stuff. Going back to Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, like this was like Marvel comics. Like I'm buying these every Wednesday. This is the coolest thing ever. And so I remember we had the author of the Marvel Encyclopedia come into Imagineering shortly after the acquisition was announced. And he was going to give a presentation, just kind of a Marvel 101 to all the Imagineers. And so we piled into this giant conference room, which I believe at the time was called the WED conference room. And you can fit quite a few, most of Imagineering could fit in there. And so, there was a buzz about it, and there was, I know there was some naysayers and people that felt like Marvel wasn't Disney and didn't necessarily fit in with, with the Disney brand. But man, I didn't care. I was so excited. I was so jazzed. I just wanted to be a part of it. And so that day when the author was coming in, I went and sat in the front row. I was ready. I was so pumped. And he starts talking, and he's doing deep cuts. Like he's going into the Clone Saga. He's going into the Phoenix Saga. He's talking, about good guys becoming bad guys, and all these different things, right? And I'm there with him. I'm hanging on every word, the Kree Skrull War. I'm like, this is great. And I turn around to see who was excited with me, because I want everyone to be excited with me. And blank faces. Nobody was into it. I remember looking back and just being so disheartened that people weren't as excited about it as I was. And so initially I was very disappointed, but then the light went off again. The light had gone off many times before. This is an opportunity. This thing maybe better than anybody in this room, and you're a fan of it and you love it, and a lot of people don't seem to. So I'm all in. So I decided then and there, I'm gonna focus on Marvel. I'm gonna make this my thing. I'm gonna get involved in as many Marvel things as I can. I'm gonna do my homework and learn even more about the Marvel universe. And I want to be the partner of choice for any Marvel project that's happening here. And that's exactly what we did, and we were pitching ideas big and small, as small as a Marvel churro cart all the way up to the biggest thing you can imagine. So, and we just had a blast. And obviously, not everything gets built, but it was concept, and we were ideating and we were having a blast doing it. And through that, I got to, meet the guys at Marvel, and have new mentors, on the Marvel side of things. Folks like Joe Quesada and Dan Buckley, who became, good friends and mentors to me. Joe in particular, he and I became just really tight, really great friends. And that led to my new job.
Well, yeah. So you mentioned too pitching projects. So I feel like it's good to mention the first big Marvel attraction, which was the Iron Man experience in Hong Kong. And I did talk to Joe and Cicero about this because he was in charge of Hong Kong at the time. It was interesting to hear about it from somebody who was kind of green lighting it. But I'd love to hear about it from your experience as someone who's, such a fan of Marvel, and to have this attraction go into Hong Kong, and have the Stark Expo pre-show and everything else. It had to be pretty cool to have that in Tomorrowland.
Yeah. And bless Joe for giving us the reins to kind of try and come up with something. Right. So, we had done, I came on at the very end of what was some early development on bringing Star Tours to Hong Kong. And, so there was some thinking about so there, obviously there's no Star Tours there. So we thought, let's take Star Tours to Hong Kong. And so I did a few concept designs of what that might look like. And shortly after doing that, got the feedback from partners at Hong Kong Disneyland that they're not really into Star Wars over there, that they kind of view it as old sci-fi, and which at first broke our hearts, right? You're here, we're recording this on May the 4th. Yeah. So it's Star Wars Day. And so how could you not love Star Wars? Don't we all love Star Wars? And they didn't they didn't grow up with it. It wasn't, part of their DNA the way it is with us here in the US. But they told us, but we really love Marvel. We really love the Marvel movie. We'd like to do something with Marvel. And so we're like, okay. So we started brainstorming Marvel stuff. And it wasn't just Marvel stuff, but we also had to think, because we had never done a Marvel attraction before, we had to think philosophically about how you bring Marvel and that world, the Marvel universe of characters, into a Disney theme park. Because, I've said it in other interviews, and I apologize if people have heard this before, but, when you go into a Disney castle park, you pass through that tunnel and that plaque that says, here you leave, today and enter the worlds of yesterday, tomorrow, and fantasy. That's a promise. That's a promise that every Disney castle park makes to you. But the Marvel universe takes place here and now. It's, Peter Parker is a kid from Queens, right? So he lives in our world. Disneyland would exist in the Marvel universe, and it does. We've seen it in comics a few times. And so how do we bring the Marvel universe into a park that's about taking you out of the real world? So we had to think about that philosophically. And so we quickly gravitated towards the idea of the Stark Expo from Iron Man 2. That this was a thing where Tony Stark was celebrating his technology. If you remember the scene from Iron Man 2, it's very Disney-esque. It's very World's Fair-esque. And so, it had the song written by Richard Sherman. And so there was a lot of Disney DNA in that sequence from Iron Man 2. And so we gravitated towards that as a way to kind of get us in to the Marvel universe. We're like, well, what if Tony Stark brought the Stark Expo to Hong Kong? And like he sets up shop here in Tomorrowland, and that would be a way in. Like we'd have to acknowledge Disneyland as a park because he would know that he's in Disneyland. So that was our initial hook, but it wasn't the version of the Iron Man experience that you saw today. So one night, I like most of my ideas, they usually happen at about 3:00 in the morning. And I woke up and I said to my wife, I'm like, we did all that work trying to figure out how Star Tours could fit in. And we've gone down this other path with the Stark Expo, but like, what if we married those ideas? There's nothing sacred that a simulator ride has to be a Star Wars ride. Like, why couldn't a simulator ride be a Marvel ride? Why couldn't it be, the Marvel characters and you see the Marvel universe, in your simulator ride? And she's like, you should jot it down. So I did some scribbles. My whole commute, that's all I could think about. I was jotting down ideas. First thing I did when I got into office that day, I put together a pitch board. Robert Coltrane, who was the creative director overseeing that project, I took it to him and I go, hey, and by the way, that day we were about to talk to Tom Staggs,
wow,
who was the head of Parks and Resorts at the time. And so we were about to go into our pitch on what the Stark Expo was going to be. And so I go, Robert, I had this idea. It's kind of crazy. What do you think about this? And he said, I like it. It's crazy enough that it might be the thing that they want to do, but like, let's kind of put it in our back pocket. We've gone down our path already with these other concepts. And if we need a dark horse idea, we'll bring this out. I'm like, okay, fair enough. And so we went in, before we go to Tom Staggs, we go to Joe Lancicero, and we pitch it to him. And then we go, by the way, we have this other little dark horse idea. And Joe kind of said the same thing. He's like, that's just crazy enough that they just might pick it. So like, let's keep that in our back pocket as a dark horse. So we get to the meeting with Tom. Sorry to be long-winded with this answer.
No, it's great.
And Tom likes all the ideas that we proposed to him. He totally gets the Stark Expo approach. And we said, well, we kind of have this other idea. And so we bring out the simulator version of it. And I pitch it to Tom, and he goes, that's what we're doing. He's like, that's it. That's the thing. And so we were kind of like, I think we're a go on this. And so we were off and running. And like I said, initially it wasn't Iron Man specific. It was more of like a Marvel Universe 101. And then that kind of morphed into an Avengers ride. And then it was John Lasseter who really challenged us to really focus and lock this in on Iron Man. That Iron Man was the hot character at the time. The first Avengers film had come out, but like nothing had, even though Thor and Captain America were popular, Iron Man was the guy. Like he was the kind of the main, most of the popularity sat on Robert Downey Jr. and Iron Man. And so we locked in on Iron Man as our character. They worked with the Stark Expo conceit. And so we started developing the Iron Man experience. And by the way, I'm at Imagineering still throughout all this. So I get to, present this idea, and ultimately I got to present the idea to the Hong Kong government. At that time, it was an Avengers ride. And so I got to go to Hong Kong and had to go into this very like top secret type shield building and, with Robert and Joe and everybody and present the story for this Marvel simulator ride. And that was quite an experience. But we were off and running, and we were doing something that we were, really excited about. And that ended up becoming the Iron Man experience, the first ever Marvel attraction in a theme park, Disney park.
It's great that it all came together. Sometimes it seems like with like an attraction that once you come up with it, it's like, oh, that makes total sense, but it has to kind of seem like a crazy idea at first. But now that I look at it, I go, Iron Man, the Star Tours, because they don't have Star Tours, Tomorrowland, Stark Expo, it all kind of fits. But it seemed like it had to go through some steps to get there. Yeah. But you mentioned your job too, because I know you were at WDI then, but then moved. But I know you ultimately, like you referenced, moved to Marvel. So I'd love to know about what it was like moving over to Marvel and kind of what you were then doing in that job.
Like about halfway through the development of the Iron Man experience, Joe Quesada, who, I mentioned before, has become an incredible friend and mentor to me, a superstar in his own right, really a Marvel legend in terms of, being an artist and a chief creative officer and editor-in-chief. Joe's kind of done it all. He and I just hit it off, mainly because we're both big baseball fans, but we talk baseball, we talk Marvel. But Joe and I were actually at breakfast one day, And I told them, I said, hey, crazy idea. Do you think Marvel would ever be interested in kind of having an Imagineer like full-time on staff? So this was my play to like be the full-time Imagineer on the Marvel team. Like that was my thought. So I'm like, I'm gonna try and, cement this marriage, because I'd already been working with them. I was working on so many different Marvel projects that were in kind of blue sky development, obviously the Iron Man experience. And Joe said, yeah, it's interesting. That's an interesting idea. Let me give that some thought. And that was the end of the conversation. So I thought, hey, I tried, I threw it out there. It probably never happened. A few months later, I get a call that they are interested in having to come over and lead a new division of Marvel, be the creative director of essentially what had been a marketing assignment, but it would be overseeing live events, which would include theme park development and things like that. Arena shows and character appearances and stuff like that for Marvel. And I thought, hey, if there's one company that can pull me away from Walt Disney Imagineering, it was Marvel. That was the one. And it was just an opportunity that was too good to be true. And so I jumped all over it. And that again was another little pivot in my career that really ended up being a complete game changer and changed the trajectory of my career forever. So one of our first initiatives was to, we changed the name from Live Events, solidified it as its own division, and made it Marvel themed entertainment. And that's what I've been doing for the, almost a little over, actually it's been a little over 6 years now. And, we've certainly done a lot of work in the Disney theme park space, but, in addition to that, we do arena shows and comic conventions and fan events and character appearance and museum exhibits. And so kind of the dimensional installations of the Marvel brand is what we're responsible for. And we have a lot of great partners that we work with to help bring these things to life. And it's awesome. We're crazy busy. We found new ways to be busy even during the pandemic. And, I really do love the job that I have in the sandbox that I get to play in.
Oh, it sounds like a perfect fit for knowing what I do about your background and everything else. It just seems to fit perfectly. Well, one of the things, though, that happened, I believe, when you were then at Marvel was Mission Breakout, the Guardians of the Galaxy attraction.
Yep.
And with Joe Rohde leading and then changing over the Tower of Terror, which, is, a pretty big move, especially with what's going to eventually happen at DCA. But I'd love to know, for your experience, now you're at Marvel and an attraction's being set up. But I believe you were pretty closely involved in that too. So I'm wondering what that was like.
Look, Joe Rohde's a legend. Everybody, who's a fan of Disney and a fan of the parks knows Joe. I had never really worked with him. I knew who he was, obviously, at Imagineering, but I just hadn't really worked with him too much. And he was put in charge of what's called the Marvel portfolio. One of our first assignments was, Joe wanted to figure out how he envisioned Marvel in the parks, because we'd done a lot of philosophy, and anytime you start a big Marvel project, the philosophy of how you bring Marvel into the park, that always comes into play and always becomes the first point of, I don't want to say contention, but just a lot of spirited debate, I should say, because we're all passionate, we're all storytellers. And so, there's a lot of ideas about what that means and what's the right way to do it. And so Joe, as the new portfolio leader, he wanted to get a handle on that for himself. So he took about a week and kind of solidified what his approach was and how he thought Marvel played in the parks. And then he came back and said, here's how I imagine it. And he invited all of us to the table. And one of the first assignments to help, bring that philosophy to life was end up becoming Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout. And I learned some very valuable lessons about theme park storytelling from Joe, leadership skills. He created a very welcome, open environment. He let everybody in, have a seat at the table. Everybody had a voice. And with Mission Breakout, we were doing it, and it was such an accelerated timeline because we were trying to open it day and date with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, the Marvel Studios film. And in order to do that, we didn't have time to dance around and, pontificate about what it could be. Is like, hey, we got to make decisions like today. And we're off and running. And so we did have a little bit of time to, kind of noodle with some other ideas besides Guardians of the Galaxy, which Joe has mentioned before in other interviews. but Guardians of the Galaxy is what we kept coming back to, just because it was such a radical change, so different. We thought we could tell a story that fit within that ride system. We could confine the characters in a way, it's not like Spider-Man where you want to see him swinging all over the place and doing crazy stuff, but like this is a pretty small space, and the Guardians worked in what we were trying to do, and of course the humor that comes with them, but it was a great experience working with the folks at Marvel Studios, James Gunn, all the actors from the films, and like I said, Joe creating a great environment of open communication and dialogue, really made it for a pretty awesome experience. And look, we know there were some naysayers, some people that maybe weren't thrilled with the idea of changing the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror, but those voices weren't lost on us. But we knew what we were in charge with doing, and we believed in the story that we had come up with and the experience that we had created, that it was fun, that it was funny, that it was irreverent, and that it was something radically different, but it had to be at least as good, if not better, than what was there before. And that was the bar that we set for ourselves. And I'll leave that up to the fans to decide if we met that bar or not. But I know that we were very proud of what we did, and it's still something that's always fun for me to go and experience even now.
Well, yeah, and I think, though, too, there was a lot of concern among some fans, but a lot of people I know that initially, I've heard a lot of the same type of statement, which was, at first I was very hesitant, and then I wrote it, and it was really fun. That seems to be, the general consensus, because I think people were like, oh, so you're just going to drop, not realizing that it's different. You're going up and down, and the music and the whole experience, it's something that... it's something that's totally different, which I think fits with Guardians. You couldn't just do Tower of Terror or fix a few things and have it be Guardians of the Galaxy. It wouldn't make sense.
Well, what Tower of Terror was, the whole ambiance, the whole spirit of it was different. It was about building suspense, right? So that build towards the drop was suspenseful. We're taking you through one step at a time until you get to that point where, oh my gosh, we're going to fall, and then we drop you. Right. But with Guardians, we wanted to get right into the action right away. And so there's no suspense building. It is boom. We're flying up the fortress, and then we're dropping you, and in sync with the music, in what just becomes a hilarious experience. I think it's hilarious, a hilarious experience. And then you have all these different vignettes of things that are happening to the Guardians, and it's chaos, right? It's chaos in the Collector's Fortress. So it was just a blast. And the queue was so fun to come up with, and what we were going to put in all of those vitrines, hiding some Easter eggs in there to maybe some other Disney stuff. But of course, lots of Marvel Easter eggs as well, from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the original Guardians of the Galaxy film. And there's just a ton in there. And even we were able to do some nods to the Collector and the Grandmaster from Thor Ragnarok. So there's lots of fun in that space.
Excellent. I want to ask you about one more project before we start to sum up quickly. I already have talked with Jim Clark about the Disney Kingdom series, so I feel like I'm just doing like an oral history of the Disney Kingdom series without trying here. But I'd love to briefly know, just that if people aren't aware, it's the graphic novels that were connected. It was done through Marvel, but connected to some Disney attractions like Big Thunder Mountain and Figment and Dreamfinder, and then the Museum of the Weird. I just love to briefly know kind of your experience on that and kind of working on such a different type of project.
Yeah, that was, as I mentioned before, we were all so excited about what we could do with Marvel in the theme parks that began the germ of a completely new idea. What could Marvel do with Disney stuff like that? And we thought nobody is really thinking about that. A lot of us are talking about how to bring Marvel into the parks. No one's thinking about what can Marvel now do with the Disney intellectual property, IP as we call it, right? That started, Jim, that goes back, Jim Clark and I, had a passion for doing this actually long before Disney Kingdoms came about. We worked with Daniel and a few others we were really passionate about the Museum of the Weird. So for, for your Disney fans that listen to this show, probably familiar with the Museum of the Weird, Rolly Crump, Disney legend, and his designs for that space that was actually announced on the Disneyland 10th Centennial TV special. Walt announced it.
Yeah.
And he announces it with It's a Small World, Pirates of the Caribbean, Haunted Mansion, and the fourth one announced on that show was Museum of the Weird. Like, okay, so the three that got built became arguably the most iconic Disney attractions ever made, right? They're still around to this day. Those are like staples of every castle park. You got to have, some version of those in some way. But Museum of the Weird never happened. But we're like, what a great name. What a great idea. We love Rolly's art. And so we became passionate about trying to bring back the Museum of the Weird. And, Jim could testify that we did every iteration you can imagine of what the Museum of the Weird could be, because we were so passionate and so hungry to bring it back. And so we got one piece of feedback that told us it's going to be hard for you guys to do this because it's really not attached to any kind of IP or movie or anything like that. And that was a very honest but a very disheartening note to receive. So we played with some different IP that we could maybe attach to it. But we thought none of that felt quite right. So we hatched a different idea. We said, hey, these comic books are getting turned into movies, and now we're all talking about how to make them into theme parks. What if we backdoored this whole idea and said, what if we made this into a comic book first, and then it could become a movie, and then we could build Museum of the Weird? So that was the idea. It's like, we're going to turn this into a comic book. So what is a Museum of the Weird comic book? And so Disney, about that time, this is actually before they bought Marvel, formed a comic book company at the Walt Disney Studios called Kingdom Comics. And the whole idea was that they were going to release comic books with the intent of turning them into big feature film franchises. And so Jim and I, we pitched Museum of the Weird to them, amongst a few others. And they loved the idea. We thought it was going to get turned into a comic book. But in the course of that project, Disney buys Marvel, Kingdom Comics goes away. And so we're like, well, maybe we're not doing it with Kingdom Comics anymore. Let's go pitch it to the Marvel guys. So this was our idea to turn this into a feature film franchise. So then we thought, what I mentioned before, what could Marvel do with Disney? So we rallied not just Jim Clark, but Josh Shipley and Tom Morris. And we had an idea to turn this thing into a comic book series. And so we pitched it to Marvel. We actually pitched it to Joe Quesada at a baseball game. So Josh Shipley and I, after the D23 Expo, we go to the Angel game, and our hidden agenda was to pitch this idea of a Disney Kingdoms comic. And so, in addition to the Museum of the Weird, Josh and I had been kind of formulating an idea of doing a Disney comic book universe. And so we kind of married those two ideas. So we pitched it to Joe, and Joe, it was kind of the same idea as when I pitched him about the idea of, coming to Marvel. He's like, that's an interesting idea. So a few months later goes by, Joe calls us and he goes, hey, remember that idea that you guys pitched me about the Disney Comics thing? Well, we dig it. We're going to do it. And so we're like, okay, I guess we're doing these comics. And the first one out of the gate, we're like, we want to do Museum of the Weird. Turns out there is an actual Museum of the Weird in Texas, Austin, Texas, I believe. And so we couldn't call it Museum of the Weird for legal reasons. So we changed the name to Seekers of the Weird. It's about the people. And within the book, Seekers of the Weird, the Museum of the Weird is a thing. And so that was our first book. And then we were off and running now on a whole new line of comics, and we did Figment, which was a huge, huge hit. We did the Haunted Mansion. We did Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. We did another edition of Figment. We did the Enchanted Tiki Room. And so we were really having a blast. We brought other Imagineers on, like Andy DiGenova. And we had a nice little core group of Imagineers, about 5 or 6 of us, that were really passionate about this idea and bringing these comics to life, working very closely with the Marvel team and their writers and editors and artists, and letting them do what they do. And we were kind of the Imagineering experts and kind of helping them with that side of the house. And it was a true labor love. We really loved doing that project. It was a blast to do. And, I got to scratch that comic book itch in a completely different way than I had imagined previously.
Yeah, it's such a cool project, just the merger of Marvel and Disney and the different interactions, and like something like Museum of the Weird, which still holding the torch for it. I don't know if it's going to happen, but someday.
You never know, man. You never know. These things have a way of finding new lives somehow, some way.
You never know. Maybe they make a new Haunted Mansion movie at some point, and then somehow the Museum of the Weird's incorporated, and then it kind of just filters right in. We'll see. But
there you go.
Yeah, you never know. It could happen. All right, well, I'm going to finish. I want to ask you just a few kind of overall questions before we finish.
Sure.
The main one is, I asked this to a lot of people, which is more about like the type of advice you would give to aspiring Imagineers and everything. I'm curious for you, just given that you have slightly different background with comics and with Marvel, you could take it a lot of different ways, but I'd love to know from your experience, what advice you might give to aspiring artists to maybe want to work in comics or possibly Imagineering, but are still kind of figuring out their way. Kind of, what would you suggest they do, or even just how they approach things?
There's no, in my mind, and I give this kind of advice to college students and stuff quite a bit, there's really no substitute for hard work. Try and identify what it is that you want to do. I think a common phrase is jack of all trades. And everybody wants to be a jack of all trades and do everything. But there's a second half of that phrase, which is jack of all trades, master of none. And that's not a good thing. That's not a good place to be. So my recommendation is, great to be a jack of all trades. But instead of master of none, how about be master of one? Be the best at something. Like, you got to be really good at something that you really love and are passionate about, what's going to get you out of that bed in the morning, that you want to work on, and you want to do it every single day. At the end of the day, all these project teams at Imagineering or at Marvel or I would imagine, any other company, they got to identify who's going to be on that project and what your deliverable is going to be on that project. So in order to get to be one of the people on that Excel spreadsheet that has a list of all the people on there, you got to figure out what your deliverable is and what your expertise is. And then once you're on that project team, now you can show you have great ideas, you can write, you can do whatever it is, all these other things that you can do. But you need to be that master of one that got you in the room. And so I say, hey, try and identify what those things are that you're really good at, that you can really develop and become a master at, and work really hard and sacrifice. Because, I got almost obsessive about, if I wasn't working hard on my craft, somebody else out there was. Somebody else out there. And when the opportunity comes, when opportunity knocks, they're going to get the job because they're busting their hump every day. And so I wanted to be that guy. I wanted to be that guy that was going to work harder than anybody else. So that's kind of my big advice for young artists. And don't get so, I think people get locked in the intellectual property of it all. Like, oh, I want to be at Disney. I want to be at Marvel. I want to be at Universal, whatever it is. That should, in my mind, should be almost secondary. I think it's good to have those goals in the back of your mind, but really think about what it is that you want to do. What is it that you want to create? Do you want to design theme parks? Do you want to be an engineer? Do you want to be a writer? Do you want to draw comics? Do you want to animate? Like, what is it that you want to do? And then once you identify what that thing is that you really want to do, then you can start going after the companies that you want to work for and getting experience wherever you can. Because there was a lot of projects that I worked on before I got to Disney that didn't pay great, but got me some valuable experience, and I got to know some people that could help me with my career. Because who you know is almost as important as how good you are. Sometimes more important, which is honest but true. So it's good to, get experience where you can, work your butt off, and there's really no substitute for that.
No, I think that's a great answer. And I've heard similar themes from others, but really the hard work part of it, I think that you've stressed is a key and really good advice. Well, Marvel's got a lot going on. They've, because of the pandemic, you got 4 new films coming in the second half of 2021. We've already had 2 great shows. Falcon and Winter Soldier just finished. We have Loki. There's so many other things beyond that. That's like the high level. What are you excited about from what's coming in the near or even far future at Marvel?
So many things. look, and every division of Marvel has got just amazing things going on. And that's not me being a company man. That's me being the Wednesday Warrior and the fan of Spider-Man as Amazing Friends from the 80s. There's so much going on right now, Marvel. It's just such a great time. It's exciting. I mean, every week we got a whole, 15 to 20 comics coming out, telling completely new stories with new characters being invented all the time. The amazingly talented writers and artists that are putting those together. The video games division is just killing it, with Avengers and Spider-Man and Miles Morales, and the mobile games, Marvel Studios. There's almost hardly a weekend, in 2021 where you're not doing something Marvel related, where, we're all excited for Loki that's coming up, and Black Widow, and the string of films that is coming up, and later on in the year, Ms. Marvel and Hawkeye. It's just an awesome time. And then for us at Themed Entertainment, I mean, we just got done with a NBA broadcast last night, where we did it was called Arena of Heroes, Marvel's Arena of Heroes, which was a combination of the NBA and Marvel, and telling a story where we didn't know what the ending was going to be. So we had to come up with multiple endings for this scenario. So we're doing, museum exhibits, and the Comic Cons are about to come back. And so, in the theme park space, Avengers Campus is about to open. So, we're all very excited for what's happening at Marvel. It's a great time to be a Marvel fan. There's so many exciting projects that are coming, and ways to consume. If you're not a comic book guy, and you just like going to the movies, that's totally fine. If you're a hardcore gamer, we got stuff for you. If you love going to the cons, I can't wait to get back to the cons again and see everybody, see the fans. Doing the cons has become really one of my favorite things to do, because we put together our Marvel booth, and I still think like an Imagineer in all my projects. So when we put together our Marvel booth, I'm thinking about what's the guest experience, and what are they going to get to see? You got to be 360 degrees, and how do you feel immersed in the Marvel brand when you're there in the Marvel stories, and you get to meet your favorite creators and actors and filmmakers. Like that's really fun. And then to see the cosplayers come, and they're so passionate and talented, and I've really come to enjoy doing the cons, and I can't wait for those to get back. So, like I said, the Marvel universe is big. It's moving on to greater glory, as Stan Lee used to say. And man, we're having a blast doing it.
Well, awesome. Well, I'm excited. I'm even more excited now. Your enthusiasm just has me, I'm ready to just run through a wall for this. This is really exciting. All right. Last question.
You're gonna Hulk smash right through that wall.
Yeah. Last question. This may be the most important. So I know you come from a baseball family. You mentioned baseball a few times. Your dad and brother played in the major leagues. So
that's right. Yeah.
This is going to be out of date by the time this comes out. As of this recording, the Angels are 13-14. They're in fourth place. Twofold question here. Do they have a chance this year? Tough division, surprising teams, Seattle, Oakland, doing well. And will Mike Trout ever get to the playoffs again?
You know what? I love that you brought this question up, because, as I mentioned before, I don't know if I'd have my career at Marvel if I couldn't talk a little bit of baseball. Thanks to, Joe and I hitting it off on the baseball front. So I'm always happy to talk baseball. So yeah, my dad, he was a major league player in the 70s and then a scout through the 80s and 90s. And he's retired now and is enjoying being retired. And my brother Bobby, actually tonight, the night of this recording, he's making his managerial debut. He was a former major league player, but now he's the manager of the Midland Rockhounds. And I'm very excited for him. It's a whole new career for him. And my other brother, Blake, is a scout with the Toronto Blue Jays, and he's just having a tremendous career as well. So baseball is certainly in my blood, and I love the game. And like I said, some of the pro sports activations that we've now been doing with Marvel allows me to, before I got to blend theme parks and Marvel, now I'm getting to dip into the professional sports world. I got to draw a card of Mike Trout in a Topps partnership. And so I'm getting to blend my affinity for sports and baseball with Marvel. So it's another great marriage. But as far as the Angels go, I think we're going to be okay. I think our lineup is nails as always. Pitching can be a little suspect. We got to avoid the injury bug. But I think the division is a little bit weakened. I think that the Astros have taken a little bit of a hit. Oakland's always going to be sneaky tough. But I think the Angels could get back to. I think they can get back to the playoffs this year. I think I think they look good. Like I said, they had a few injuries, but when everybody's healthy, the Angels are banging, and I think Trout gets back to the playoffs in 2021. If not 2021, 2022 for sure.
I like the optimism. That's. I hope it happens because a player that good, I want to see him in the playoffs, and I want them to make it. I'm a Cardinal fan. I'm in St. Louis. They've been a little shaky lately, but I can't complain. I mean,
my dad was a Cardinal.
Oh, really? That's interesting. I didn't realize that.
1971, man.
Just a little before my time, but yeah. So yeah, we could do about a 2-hour baseball podcast, but I don't know. I don't know if the target audience here is going to follow us along, but I had to ask you about it because
that's
baseball. Okay. On that note of optimism, thanks so much for being on the show. It was a blast to talk with you, Brian. It's really cool, and I'm excited to learn more about your career, but also with what's going to happen at Marvel.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Dan. It has been great to talk to you. You do a great show. You've had some of my best friends on this show, and it's been my pleasure.
Well, that was great. Before I finished, I do have to give an update on the Los Angeles Angels. I'm recording this on May 26th, so it's still a little ways from when you're hearing this. But the update is, if you recall, the Angels were, I believe, 13-14 when we were talking with Brian. Now they have 21 wins and 27 losses, unfortunately. They are 6 games out of first. They're in last, tied with the Rangers, but really it's not that far. So I don't want to be pessimistic. They have won their last 2 games as I speak. They have Shohei Ohtani, who's incredible. Oh my gosh, what he's doing is amazing. They don't have Albert Pujols anymore, though. He's now the Dodgers. Mike Trout is hurt. He's going to be out for a while. So I think the odds aren't great. But again, I look at the other teams in this division. The A's are leading. Astros are up there. Seattle and Texas aren't very good. The Angels have a shot, but without Trout and with their pitching, Dylan Bundy hasn't been great. I'm not sure. It'll be interesting to see. I did enjoy talking a little bit of baseball with Brian. I feel like we could have talked a lot more about that near the end. It rarely happens on this podcast. It's a rare thing for me, and maybe I should do it more. I don't know. Let me know what you think on that front. If you enjoyed this show, I have done a bunch of cool, really fun interviews with Imagineers this year, including 2 with Chris Runco. I talked to Jim Clark, who Brian referenced during the podcast, Chris Merritt and Don Carson, Valerie Edwards, so many others, and I have a lot of fun ones coming up. You can go to tomorrowsociety.com/podcasts with an S at the end to find access to all those shows and a lot more on the website. I'd like to give a shout out to my latest member of the Tomorrow Society through Patreon, Alexis. Thank you so much, Alexis, and to all of you who helped support the show. If you would like to find out how you can help out this listener-supported show, go to patreon.com/tomorrowsociety. To learn more, you can get access to some really cool perks and help to keep this show going. If you also just want to tell other people about the show, you can do that with a rating and review at Apple Podcasts. Now, I say that with a caveat. There have been a lot of glitches lately, including with my last show where it didn't come out for a while. Refreshing is really slow. So if you don't want to listen to Apple Podcasts, there are other places. Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, so many others. But if you are sticking with Apple, leave a 5-star rating, give a review. It still makes a difference. Even as some people move on to other platforms, a lot of people still listen to Apple. So it helps people to find the show. If you'd like to get a hold of me, I always love hearing from you. Email dan@tomorrowsociety.com. Twitter, Tomorrow SOC, Facebook, Instagram, Tomorrow Society. There's also a YouTube channel, tomorrowsociety.com/YouTube is the way to go to get there. I show a bunch of home movies, other cool stuff. There's a lot there that's fun, especially if you're interested in Disney history. Tomorrow Society podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Dan Heaton. The music was written by Adam Hookey and recorded by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I am talking once again with Rick Rothschild, who is back to talk about more projects he worked on during his many years at Walt Disney Imagineering. This time we're going to talk about Captain EO, the extraterrestrial alien encounter, Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, Star Tours, and more. It's always great to talk to Rick, and I'm glad he was able to come back once again. Thanks so much for listening. Go out there, get vaccinated. A lot of parks are starting to pull back on restrictions. Disneyland is going to allow out-of-state guests in the middle of June very soon. Be safe out there. Have a great time this summer, and I will talk to you again next time.